Some years ago, I met the gentleman who owns this engine, and it turned out he lives in a castle. And of course he invited me around to have a look at it. You know. It isn't really a castle as most people know. It's really a big, beautiful country house that's built to look like a castle. It's got battlements and everything, but it's never really been under siege. Its owner is James Harvey Bathurst. We got friendly, really, because he's a dedicated traction engine enthusiast and railway enthusiast.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me.
I helped him restore one of his favourite engines, Atlas, which of course once resided in the north of England around Manchester, but now it lives here on the forecourt of Eastnor Castle. Here we are in the Great Hall at Eastnor Castle, but to me it looks a lot more comfy than a proper castle. You know, castles are cold, drafty places, and this is quite lovely and comfortable. And of course James is here, the owner, who's going to tell us all about it and, you know, how it all came about. Isn't that right, Jim?
Yeah, well, it's a bit surprising, isn't it? Because it does look like a castle from the distance, and that was the point. In 1800, a lot of people were looking back to the medieval times, and my family had been here for about 200 years, and they thought this is the time to show everybody that we're a really old family and put up a really impressive buildings. And revival castles, this is a Norman revival castle, seems to be a bit the fashion.
I mean, it's the sheer size of this room to impress people, eh?
It's incredibly impressive.
Yeah. So this pretend castle was never really put to the test in war. Real castles had a much more serious purpose. The reason they were built was to keep attacking armies out. So how did something as functional as a castle turn into something as ornate as this? In this series, we're going to look at how things and why things were built, and what sort of tools and materials were used, and how buildings were adapted and altered to meet changing needs. We'll be visiting some of my favourite ancient castles, cathedrals and great houses, as well as more modern things like bridges, tunnels and other great engineering marvels. All of them are very different in style and purpose, but what they all have in common for me is the great range of craft skills that went into designing, building and decorating them. From the remains of some of our most mysterious and ancient monuments right up to the shiny futuristic structure like Lloyd's Building in London, the skills of architects and builders are there to be seen. But I'm starting off by going to see something very simple. Man's most basic need was to defend himself, and our earliest defensive constructions were great earthworks like the outer banks and ditches that surround Old Sarum in Wiltshire. This huge earthworks were built like in the Iron Age, you know, 500 years BC. It sort of defies all wonder when you think that they have no machinery or anything. You know, it were built by the basic tools and muscle power. I mean, when you think to actually get up there where the defenders were, you'd got to come up this banking over here with whatever you were going to throw at them, which wouldn't be a lot because you'd be knackered by the time you got up here. Then you've got to descend into the valley with the wrath of them men up there throwing great rocks at you, maybe, and then of course attempt to get up. It must have been a pretty, you know, impossible place to take. And when you think all that time ago, you know, long time ago, like the forerunner of a castle. But it was all pretty basic. If you want to see real engineering skills on a truly grand scale, you have to wait for the Romans. When the Romans came to Britain, they brought with them a far more sophisticated building techniques than what we'd ever had before, you know. Hadrian's Wall here is the biggest monument that the Roman Empire left behind for us. It stretches right across northern England from Bowness on the Solway Firth to Wall's End on Tyne. Its purpose was to stop the marauding Scotsmen getting across the border. or as Adrian put it, to stop the barbarians getting towards the Romans. And work started in the year of 122 AD, and it took 6 years to build, you know. I mean, they worked bloody hard, you know. It's an amazing piece of work. You can't help but notice how the quality of it all varies, you know, as you go from area to area. Some places the stonework just follows the contours of the hillside, and other places it's beautiful and level, as though that section had some sort of levelling gear. Of all the forts along Hadrian's Wall, Housteads is one of the best preserved. There's examples of nearly everything here, you know. There's the governor's house, the granary, the latrines. This is rather a splendid pillow that I think once upon a time must have supported 2 arches in what's left of the northern gateway. I mean, the beautiful chisel marks still here, you know. It's amazing after all these years, all these centuries, you know. These 2 towers, one on each side, the far one were once the guard room, I've heard tell. I mean, and judging by the thickness of the walls, it must have been maybe 30 or 40 feet high, you know. Quite a nice bit of building, you know. No wonder really the things lasted so long. If it was so well built, you might wonder why there's so little left of it today. Well, when the Romans left in about 400 AD, the wall was abandoned and people began to nick bits of stone to build their own walls, farmhouses and even churches and abbeys. But even from what's left today, you can still see how it was built if you look carefully. This really is one of the highlights of the wall fort, the communal bathtub and the communal toilets or latrines. It's rather ingenious how they kept the water in it, you know. There's beautiful grooves chiselled down the ends of each stone, and then they poured molten lead down, and then of course they'll have corked it up rather like they used to cork the wooden planks in the deck of a ship. The water from the bath came out through this outlet and was channelled into the latrines. And it came round the corner here and it dripped down into this trough here. And then it ran all the full length of the toilets and back this way and back into the main channel that took away all the effluent. And of course the reason for this trough were, while you were sat there on the thunderbox chatting with your mate, you wash your sponge in the running water, and then after you'd done that, these 2 sinks, the rectangular shaped one and the round one, would be where they wash their hands afterwards, you know. Just what they did with the sponges, I don't know, because all the woodwork and the actual planking, I suppose, with the holes in, is all, of course, gone. But I suppose it all ran out down the hill where the sheep are, and it must have been a bit stinky down there in them days. What's interesting is the way they kept the water in the bath. Yeah. Right, that's it. That's Houstead forts, the Roman baths, the way they had of keeping the water in them, you know, as the stone flags came end to end, they actually cut a groove down the middle and of course poured molten lead in like I've just done here. They would have had possibly to build a little pile of stones up at each side with some clay behind to stop the molten lead shoving the clay out, you see. Here I'm a bit lucky because I've got this old moulding box and some sand on each side which will have the same effect. I'll now proceed to dismantle the moulding boxes and shift the sand, and we'll be able to see just how where the lead is all the way down in the joint, you see. Right. Now if you imagine that, you know, these things were 3 feet deep, and also the hole in the middle, or the diamond-shaped slot in the middle, would stop the flagstones moving in either direction. Blooming heck, it stuck, believe it or not. Blooming, I didn't expect that. I didn't think that it would have done that. I thought it would have come apart. You know, I mean, really, if it were corked up, then it'd definitely be watertight. I think I'll go and build a Roman bath somewhere now. You know, it's quite good, that. I'm quite pleased. I didn't expect it. Hadrian's Wall only saw active service for about 300 years, you know. Dover Castle here, one of Europe's strongest fortresses, saw action from the Iron Age up to the Atomic Age almost. And here's Ken, who's the general manager, who's going to tell me why it's such a strategic and important spot, you know. I mean, I know for one thing we're high up. That's a good start.
The reason why it's so important is out there. If you look closely, you can just see France.
Yeah.
You can see France, they can see us. And if they can see us, they want to invade. And this place is really here to protect this country from invasion.
Just in case Mr. Bonaparte sets sail.
Well, everybody landed here. I mean, this is a natural harbour anyway. You can see the cliffs are quite steep all the way around. And this is really the only place where you can land. So it's probably all started with an Iron Age fort. We had an Iron Age fort up there. On top of that, they built a Roman lighthouse. Again, so the Romans landed just around the corner from here, and they wanted to invade and to go on from there. So we've got an Iron Age fort, Roman lighthouse. We've got a big Norman keep, World War I, World War II. It covers the whole period of the history.
Yeah. The keep was built by Henry II in the 12th century, and with a few modifications, it retained a military role right up to 1945. Henry made Dover into one of the most powerful of all medieval castles. Its great strength was due to the successive rings of defensive walls protecting the keep in the centre.
This is the last line of defence.
Yeah,
you have to sort of get into the keep itself, and to get out of here, you've got to go across a drawbridge to get to the inner bailey.
Yeah.
You then got the next wall, which is the inner bailey wall going around. Then you've got the outer bailey, and you can see the ditches. The ditches on both sides go all the way down to the cliffs, and the cliffs are sort of fairly impregnable anyway.
You've got 300 foot of sheer drop.
Well, there's 300 feet of cliff. We're at the highest point now, so there's 300 feet of cliffs, and we're about 90 feet high anyway. So this is the tallest point. Get a good view. You can see France very well now.
Yeah. And it was from across that narrow strip of water that the greatest threats always came. So Dover Castle was always heavily fortified, and barrack blocks were built all over the place. At the end of the 18th century, when Britain was at war with France, conditions in the castle became very overcrowded. So the Royal Engineers brought in a company of miners to tunnel into the cliffs and create an underground barracks that accommodated over 2,000 men. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, they were very little used.
This is the Napoleonic staircase. It's a double helix.
Yeah, that means like it's two staircases.
Two cases, sort of one on top of the other.
Yeah.
And there's a triple one on the other side of the hill for Western Heights.
Yeah.
So this is what they
And just before the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, they were turned into a bomb-proof command headquarters. Yeah, it's very interesting down here.
This is the command centre for the coastal artillery. So, I mean, each of the tunnels had its own use by the different people. The one over there, the one over next to us was the Navy, and Admiral Ramsey had his bit of it in there. Corps Command coastal artillery in here, but all the guns and all the radar were all controlled from here.
Yeah, I believe the gentleman who planned out and mapped out Dunkirk from somewhere in these tunnels in his little hideaway.
The next long tunnel along on the other side of the wall here is the Navy's tunnel. And at the end of that tunnel, that's where Vice Admiral Ramsey, he was initially looking after the Dover Patrol. He was looking after the channel and sort of controlling all the ships going through there. He was the one that masterminded the evacuation of Dunkirk.
Altogether, 338,000 men were evacuated from Dunkirk, and over 800 ships brought them back to the safety of Dover.
Okay, this is the balcony for the secret wartime tunnels. Interesting thing here is that these are some of the oldest railings in the country. All the railings in World War II were all taken and melted down for guns, but these were here. But we got pictures of Vice Admiral Ramsey and Churchill and the King coming down here. They would come here because they could see France. This is where they stood and looked out, and they could see the war happening.
See the flashes in the bangs.
And if anything happened and there was something coming over, then they could nip back into the tunnels and where it was nice and safe.
What makes Dover so important is its location, and the places that castles were built were usually determined by geographical features. There's nowhere you can see this better than in Scotland, so I went up to Edinburgh to see Scotland's most famous castle. Edinburgh Castle stands on the sheer crag of Castle Rock, the core of an extinct volcano. It rises 435 feet above sea level, and it's a pretty formidable natural defence. Really, you couldn't build a castle on better foundations, you know, and so high up. That's the interesting thing, you know, on top of this volcano. I mean, even now, when you're down in town and you look up with all these escarpments that have been chiselled on the edge of the rock, it still looks a hell of a long way up. What it must have looked like before, when just this little bit was stuck right on top, you know. You can imagine the enemy turning up and just looking up in the sky and saying, sod it, we'll go. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the castle was a royal palace, and it became a symbol of royal power. And right up to today, Edinburgh is more than just an historic monument. It still has a symbolic significance, and that's why the Scottish National War Memorial is here. One of the most impressive buildings in the castle is this one behind me, you know. It's the Scottish National War Memorial, and it's also one of the most recently built. I mean, I've seen a few war memorials in my time, but believe me, this one takes some licking. Inside this war memorial was this magnificent bronze that depicts every aspect of the 1914 war, you know, right from the nurses to the tank regiments and the artillery and the flying machine men, the lot. Yeah, a lot of this bronze were first carved in wood by Alice and Maurice Meredith Williams. He must have been a Welshman. And of course, you know, after it had been carved in wood, it would be taken to the foundry and used as a pattern to cast the bronze. Certainly captured the sadness of it all, you know. There's nobody smiling, you know, on any of the faces. It's all very sad. Inside the iron caskets at the centre of the memorial are the names of 150,000 Scots men and women who died in the First World War. Military tradition and pageantry are still very strong here. I've seen the tattoo many times on television, and I've always been impressed, and when I was on my visit, I had an appointment with a man who keeps another of these traditions going. That were exciting, that.
Hello, Fred.
Yeah, hello there, Tam. How are you doing?
Very well.
This is Tam the Gun, and every day for the last 21 years he's done that, you know. Why do you do it, you know?
Well, it's a tradition that goes back to 1861, Fred. They started it for shipping in the River Forth.
Yeah.
So ships' captains could set their chronometers.
Yeah, it's a lovely gun, isn't
Well,
it?
it's actually, it was designed in 1936, put into production in 1939, and been going strong ever since.
Yeah. Tell you what, I found it quite exhilarating, that build up to 1 o'clock then when I was leaning over there looking at my watch, you know. It were almost like when we're knocking a big chimney down, you know. Same exciting feeling, you know.
And give it a good welly, Fred.
Will do. I'll do that. Right. Can you imagine that in 1914?
You enjoy that?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, many people have them outside at fireplaces, poker stands, don't
Do they?
From ceremony and pageantry in Scotland, I went to Wales to see an awesome symbol of military domination. Conway is a classic example of the invincible medieval castle. Edward I was by far our greatest castle builder, and his memorial is the great chain of 8 great stone fortresses that he built here in North Wales in a short space of 25 years. It was the greatest feat of royal building in British history. The castles were a symbol of Edward's power, and they were designed to provide him with an ultimate weapon against any threat of a Welsh uprising. Their defences needed to be very sophisticated, so to carry out the work, Edward employed a Frenchman, James of St. George, who was the greatest military architect of his age. And it was in these outposts of English power that the medieval art of castle building reached its peak. They were all built to withstand any pounding from any siege weapon that had been devised at the time, and also made any form of attack difficult and dangerous. There are 8 main towers, but if you look closely, there are 4 more smaller towers on top of the ones at this end of the castle. These were the king's quarters, and the only way into it, it's really two arms, you know, the only way into the king's quarters were by first battling your way through the main body of the castle, and the other way were by sea. As you can see, it would have been a heck of a job to scale these walls, especially with people pouring boiling tar down on you and the likes, throwing all sorts of stuff, bows and arrows. It's not as though you could dig underneath the thing because it's all based on completely solid rock. The structure is a piece of monumental engineering on a grand scale, a massive achievement for its time. And when you look closely at the walls and the towers, you can get some clues as to how the place was built. That's a big stone, that. Apparently, when they built these castles, in between all the flat, level decks of scaffolding, they have these inclined planes that they actually dragged the rocks up. And of course, it's a bit odd when you study castles and you look at them. There's some of them don't appear to have any putlog holes at all in. That's these little black holes where a piece of timber, a short length of wood called a putlog, went in. And of course, tied to the end of it, there were a fir poles or tree trunks, for want of a suitable name, and of course lashed with rope, and then the planks rested on the putlogs. They just sawed the things off as they were retreating back down again. And then of course all castles were nearly all like cement rendered and lime washed, and you can imagine them cement rendering over the end of a bit of wood, and then 500 years later the wood rotting away, hence some of them look like currant cake. There's that many of these putlog holes in them. There's lots more places like this to visit and things going on all over the country. If you're interested in gathering more information, ring the number coming up or visit our website. But what must it have been like to attack one of these places? I went to Warwick for a practical demonstration. Tell us a bit about, how you go about getting in here.
Well, Master Frederick, you're well within archer range here.
Yeah, I know, it looks
closer than 200 yards. You're taking your life into your own hands. You should be wearing a steel helm.
Yeah.
If you look across the crenellations at the top of the castle, I have my men positioned in each of the archer loops to look down upon anybody who might attack the gateway.
Once we'd got to the drawbridge, and presumably they'd have something made of wood for shelter behind a bit while they started work on it. Once you'd got that up and got to the portcullis, it'd be a bit tough even then.
Well, this actually, Master Frederick, is the strongest point of the castle, this barbican here. You'd almost be insane to attack here.
Yeah, if you got as far as the portcullis, I think you'd look like a pincushion, wouldn't you?
You would. Right, Master Frederick, so now we're actually stood within the barbican itself, and assuming that the enemy forces had made it through the mighty oaken doors that rest upon
These
hinges there.
Yeah.
In fact, while they're trying to batter through those, if you look upwards, you're underneath murder holes, from which in the floor above people could pour boiling sand or quicklime or burning oil upon to the attackers. But once you've got through this portcullis, there is also doorways surrounding this bottom level of the barbican.
Didn't like that. What the hell? The Middle Ages were pretty violent and turbulent times, but for most castles, the last time they saw any real action was at the end of the Civil War, and after that, many of them became palaces and stately homes. Warwick is a good example of the way they changed. It's one of the finest medieval castles in England. But within these very military-looking defensive walls, there's a magnificent country house. By the 1890s, the castle had become a favourite retreat for some of the most important figures in Victorian society. And in some of the castle's rooms, there is a recreation of a weekend house party with a young Winston Churchill on the guest lists. This is really my period, you know. The beauty and splendour of it all, you know. It's like there'd been a maintenance man here, you know. It must have been very pleasurable coming to work every morning and fettling bits of furniture up. Now then, I believe you've got a squeaky caster somewhere.
Oh, Dibnah. Remove your cap, please.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Now, would you have a look at this, sir? I think there's something wrong with the caster down there.
Right. Excuse me, Mr. Churchill. Well, I just fettle this here table leg. If I get this job done in time, next week we'll be visiting more houses and palaces. And don't forget the number if you want more information on some of the interesting places you can visit.